Welcome to this. I think this is our fourth, maybe our fifth, but it's certainly at least our fourth social mobility summit, and the last one that I'll be attending. But it's very, very good to see you. Well, at least the last one I'll be attending as a warden. I might attend them in some other less elevated capacity in the future. Thank you all very, very much for joining us this evening. This is a subject which is very dear to our hearts, and I know dear to the hearts of many of our alumni, and no doubt to all of you, because you've all turned up for this discussion. Over the last few years, Wadham's really put its access work and its outreach work at the heart of its mission, and it's been so important to us to reach out to young people in our particular area, to their schools, to their teachers, and to encourage more and more of them to think about the possibilities of coming to Oxford and what coming to Oxford could represent for them and for their lives and for their education. And we're delighted to have been able to expand that work very significantly. And that's because of the kindness and generosity of our donors and our alumni community. Your generosity, their generosity, has enabled us to expand this work to the place that we've reached today. We deliver now one of the most extensive outreach programs of any college in Oxford or Cambridge. We reach over 6,000 school students annually, and we work with more than 200 schools. And we've also, thanks to the generosity of donors, created the first ever dedicated access centre in either Oxford or Cambridge, our new building, the Lee Shao Key building, which is now complete and open in the back quad, a very, very beautiful and graceful structure, which will be home to our access work in future, so that young people coming up from schools to visit Wadham will be hosted there in the heart of our ancient site, but in a wonderful building to and the title of this event suggests, it's clear to us, and I'm sure clear to all of you, that the pandemic has amplified existing inequalities, and that's given us a sense of where our efforts might best be applied. And the purpose of this evening really is to enable our speakers to reflect, really for our benefit, I think, on how the learning points in the last year might inform our work in the coming years. We've been advised again this year by the Bridge Group, a social mobility think tank, who have been tremendously helpful to us. And I'm delighted that the CEO of the Bridge Group, Nick Miller, is here this evening to help facilitate our discussion and to help us identify pointers for the next stage of our access programme. I'm sure this evening is going to be tremendously helpful for us. I hope it'll be interesting for you. Before I pass over to Peter Toneman, our Access Fellow, I just wanted to express a particular word of welcome to our alumna, Natalie Hobbs, who's a partner at the Magic Circle firm Linklaters, and her colleague, fellow partner, Felix Hebblethwaite, also from Linklaters. And I'm delighted to acknowledge that they have agreed with great generosity to support funding a 4-year access to law programme at Wadham. And we very much look forward to working with Natalie and with Felix to try and see that more students from disadvantaged backgrounds think of studying law, while they're studying law are supported, and once they've qualified, are supported and encouraged into the legal profession, which is an ambition which is becoming tougher and tougher for young people who come without family money. And it would be a disaster, I speak as a lawyer now, if the legal profession were to be restricted more in future to those who come from wealthy backgrounds, rather than being open to all of those who are ambitious and smart and want a career in that profession. So thank you very much to the whole partnership at Linklaters for supporting this work so generously. With that, I think I'll pass over to Professor Peter Toneman, who is our Access Supremo on governing body and keeps our toes very closely to the fire. We very rarely get through a governing body meeting without Peter raising the subject of access, and that's as it should be. So Peter, thank you for raising it so often during my wardenship, and I hope you continue to raise it as frequently during the next wardenship. Peter.
Thanks very much, Ken. So as Ken said, I've been tutor for access at Wadham, had the privilege of being tutor for access since 2013. And in the last 2 years, I've been involved in setting up 2 big new university access initiatives, Opportunity Oxford and Foundation Oxford. So I thought I'd just take 2 minutes, not more, to say a brief word about these 2 programmes, since I think they have some quite major implications for the future of Wadham's extraordinary Access to Excellence programme over the next few years. Wadham, as we all know, has been really, I think, fantastically successful in its aim of raising aspirations and attainment for students, talented students, right the way through from year 9 to year 13. But up until now, the university has in effect imposed a kind of firewall between our access work and undergraduate admissions. So bright students whom we've fostered and supported right through their last years at school have in effect been left to fight it out on what we euphemistically call a level playing field with all our other applicants at the point of admissions. And the trouble is that a level playing field, it really isn't. Take, for instance, our standard minimum offer for undergraduate degrees, 3 A's in the humanities, plus 1 or 2 A stars in the sciences. In the independent sector, well over 30% of students achieve those grades. Among students eligible for free school meals and among Black students, that number is well below 5%. So an apparently fair admissions process based on a mechanical use of A-level grades is in fact a massive impediment to diversifying our intake, particularly for those from the lowest income backgrounds. Opportunity Oxford, the first of the university's 2 major new schemes, now in its 2nd year. Under this scheme, the university has made available some 200 additional places, that'll be rising in future years, reserved for students who hit multiple indices of disadvantage, who would otherwise have narrowly missed out on an Oxford offer. Students taken under this scheme do an intensive, rigorous summer bridging programme after A-level, consisting of a 2-month online programme and a 2-week residential in September, focused on academic study skills and core subject knowledge. And really the aim of this scheme is to encourage admissions tutors to take risks on smart but underprepared students with the reassurance they'll be getting serious support before they start their degree. Wadham was a major early adopter of this scheme, and the impact of the scheme for the most disadvantaged groups has already, I think, been very dramatic. In my own subject, classics, one of the poshest of all Oxford subjects, maintained sector numbers across the university rose from around 30% of our intake to 48% of our intake in the first year of the scheme, with a good 15% of our intake now coming from the most disadvantaged UK groups, a transformation unlike any other in the history of the subject at Oxford. The other major scheme, Foundation Oxford, University Foundation Year, will start in autumn 2022. I think a really exciting scheme targeted at the most disadvantaged students, those who've been in care, former refugees and asylum seekers, those with caring responsibilities and so on. We will initially be admitting some 50 such students each year across the university on a reduced minimum offer, probably ABB. They'll then have a full year of additional study before they start their degree to help with the basic skills required to flourish at Oxford. And I'm very proud to say that Wadham has already secured funding for our first cohort of foundation year students at Wadham, thanks to a generous donation. And I hope very much that we'll be at the forefront of this superb initiative in the coming years. I think I'm going to pause there and hand over to Hugh Munro, our current tutor for Access, who I think is going to say a word or 2 about the challenges of Access work during the pandemic over the last 18 months or so.
I should also say that Hugh runs our Access office, so he essentially runs the Access operation in Wadham, and the college is tremendously grateful to you, Hugh, for your commitment and the extraordinary amount of hard work that you do in this area.
Thanks very much. So from our point of view, the current situation meant we had to refocus our priorities. So for us, that meant really concentrating on students based on their proximity to university. So prioritizing year 12 and year 13. In everything we did, we tried to really put ourselves in the position of, speaking as an ex-teacher myself, how could we take the weight off schools as best we can, and how could we target our support to those students most in need. So one of the ways that we did that was prioritizing application support. So we worked with third party, so Causeway Education, and approached pupils with the backgrounds that Peter was mentioning there, eligible for free school meals, with application support and mentoring throughout that process, and we're able to target particular schools for that. The other big challenge for us was pivoting to online delivery and thinking about how do you do that successfully rather than just bunging up everything that you used to do face-to-face online, but making sure it's successfully delivered online was really important, and maintaining those partnerships with Causeway, Target Oxbridge, Brilliant Club, and all of the programs that Peter's been talking about there. I also spoke to some of our undergraduate students. Actually, they were both finalists, and we're going to introduce a video now, which is their reflections on that experience. So you'll hear from Tyro, one of Peter's old students, a classicist, and her reflections on learning and preparing for finals in a pandemic. And then also Dan Gunn, a PPEist, and his experience and reflections on the kind of the micro things that build up and impact your learning over the past year.
I didn't realize how much stress that actually put me under until like afterwards, talking to one of the welfare advisors in college and talking to her about sort of advice about how to deal with it. And she was like, I think you need to sort of figure out how to slow down, or at least acknowledge that this time is completely different from how you would have done your finals in a non-pandemic world. So you need to recognize that. And I felt like that was, and I think that was really, really helpful for me to sort of figure out how to adjust and I guess adapt my rhythms and sort of like the way that I was looking into final year. And some of the advice that the welfare advisor gave me, which I found really, really helpful, was to sort of incorporate benchmarks that I found helpful whilst I was at uni, but obviously do it in a way that's virtual. So, and I guess the main thing that I always I didn't realize was such a big part of my uni experience, and just kind of like, I guess, decompressing after like a tutorial or a session, was like you'll talk afterwards with your friend or like your tutorial partner as you walk back to college, or you walk to a lecture or something like that, and you don't have those interactions anymore. Like as soon as you sort of, I guess, log off of Zoom or Teams, like that's it. And you don't get that kind of like just random chatter in between, which I didn't realize how important that was to me. And she suggested, how about you incorporate that with your classmates? How about you do that? And I started doing that, and I found that really, really, really helpful.
But I think an aspect that actually is often ignored in the pandemic is space. And I know people who have got entire kind of floors of their homes that they can, retreat to for the whole of their revision. And I know others who just didn't even have their own room at home anymore. Oxford was kind of their room, and all of a sudden that was gone, and they were having to just piece together places day by day they could go and work that was still open. And help did eventually come, and people were able to go back to actually sit finals. But I think what the pandemic helped expose, or has helped expose, is these kind of smaller everyday inequalities that kind of add up, and they've always been there. It's just they've exposed it in different ways. So it's not necessarily having no technology at all to use, but having kind of bad technology. It takes time out of your day and means that you have to spend hours a day wrestling with it, or hours a day waiting for things to turn on or turn off, and fighting with the internet and this, that, and the other. It's time that other people don't have to spend. It's, if you have increased caring responsibilities, which doesn't necessarily mean you're like a full-time carer or even a part-time carer, but you have to look after family members that you otherwise wouldn't have had to look after. You've got a room perhaps, but you haven't got the luxury of your own space to work and then separately relax, and all of a sudden all that stuff is compacted into one thing. Whereas in Oxford, I would spread myself out and go to everywhere. I would go to every library I could because I needed the variety. That was obviously gone. And I think space is something that has been talked about a lot, but I think it hasn't really been, we've not really found a way to deal with that yet. And I think that's something that does need to be, you can throw money at the problem in terms of, sending technology, but actually working out how to give people the study resources they need in a far more kind of practical, real sense that aren't just virtual. And that's a very difficult problem.
Fantastic. Thank you to Ken, Peter, Hugh, Taiwo and Dan. Rich context for our lively conversation this evening on promise from the pandemic, access and educational reform after COVID. As Ken kindly mentioned in his introduction, I'm Nick Miller. and with lively debates, even just over the last couple of days, about continued alterations to school exams, self-isolation among students, and MPs reflecting on the neglect of the working class. As Ken mentioned, the effects of the pandemic are far from over and have exposed and exacerbated inequalities in our education and in our workforce system. But what have we learned during this time about policy, about practice, and about people? And most importantly, what can we carry forward positively, and what can Wadham carry forward into its Access to Excellence programme, into the next chapter of this ongoing tale of change? Well, to make sense of those matters and many more, I'm delighted to introduce colleagues on our panel, Michael, Sandra, and Sally. So we'll invite them to share some opening thoughts for a few minutes each. If I may, I'll put a question or two to the group, and then we'll move quickly into questions from this evening's audience. As ever, please make use of the chat box. We've a large audience this evening, so navigating raised hands, etc., might be tricky. So please use the chat box as you hear colleagues share their reflections if you have questions. We'll turn to Sir Michael Barber first, author, global government advisor, and up to March this year, I think, Michael, I'm correct in saying, the highly regarded inaugural chair of the Office for Students, the regulator for higher education in England. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Some opening comments, please, from you. What has the pandemic meant for UK higher education, and what might we also learn from experiences in other countries? Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. And I'll be brief. And I'm very honoured to be on such a distinguished panel. And before I even talk about the panel, I just want to pay tribute to the work that Wadham has done in this field. I think we've just heard some great presentations from Wadham colleagues, and it is genuinely leading, not just in Oxford, but across the university sector. And the building that Ken mentioned is an exciting and visual representation of a huge commitment to social mobility, to opening access up to Oxford and success in Oxford. So I wanted to pay tribute to everybody, and particularly to Ken, who's coming to the end of his term as warden, and this will be a fantastic legacy. Obviously, Ken will be the first to say it's not just about him, but I do want to pay tribute to his personal leadership as well as all the rest of you. And what I like about the Wadham work is the degree of ambition, the boldness of it, the bold commitment to an evidently moral purpose. And I think that's the background to this conversation. In 1944, I'm going to talk about America briefly, coming towards the end of what the Americans call World War II. Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the GI Bill, which was basically said anybody who's been in the armed services can get access to public universities across the United States. Obviously, they were all men at the time, so it's not perfect in terms of modern equity, but it was actually a huge step for social mobility at the end of the crisis to open it up to people who would never previously have thought of going to university, but now did. And you saw the social mobility benefits of that through the next 2 generations. And I think when I think about the pandemic and its impact on our education system, both at schools and universities, is we have to have that sense of doing something visionary. I'm not saying exactly the GI Bill, of course not, but I'm saying let's see this as a moment when we can do big, bold, ambitious things that would change social mobility, not just incrementally, but in a really dramatic way. And the kind of programs we've just heard about, the outreach programs that we've just heard about that you do at Wadham, but also Opportunity Oxford and Foundation Oxford. These are big, bold things. And I think that the combination of those around the country could make a big difference. I want to say 3 or 4 things about, if we're going to do that the universities, including Oxford colleges, but universities more generally, need to think about. The first is you have to act in the same, we want the whole system to act. I would like to see the whole system acting with the same ambition that you're acting in this field. I think it's fantastic. And I think people who act ambitiously will find that it makes a big difference and that they fulfill the moral purpose. The second is, and your outreach program is a key part of this, is it's not just about sort of opening up access. All the evidence from universities around the world is you have to go and find the students, because they won't otherwise think of coming, or some of them won't otherwise think of coming to Wadham or Oxford, or maybe in some parts of the country, even university at all. So point one is be ambitious. Point two is go and find them. Unlock aspiration, unlock potential, open up the possibility to people who would never otherwise have heard of it. Thirdly, once you've found them and attracted them, you have to enable and empower them. And that would be the third point. And there's a kind of golden triangle that you have to get right if you're going to empower people who've not normally been coming to Oxford in the past. You have to think about funding, but actually with the current university student funding system, that is in some ways the least of the worries, but that's not, I'm not saying ignore it. Secondly, you have to think about their social health and well-being as they arrive and as they make their way through particularly the first year, but maybe longer. And thirdly, you have to make sure they get the right academic support. So the foundation Oxford that we heard about, with the extra support digitally and then in person for 2 weeks, is a great start, but some of that will need to be sustained through the first year and sometimes beyond to enable people to make the most of it. I worked for a while with some American universities, and for a long time they made a mistake of saying, well, we've got these students from non-traditional backgrounds, and what we do is when they arrive in the first semester, we say, well, don't worry about how you get on, just make your, academically, just make your way, find your way into the institution. But what that did was mean that at the end of the first semester, they were even further behind the students that they'd arrived with than when they arrived. So then they reversed that and they said, right, we're great, we're really glad you're here. We're going to really accelerate your progress in the way that Foundation Oxford does before you start. We're going to accelerate your progress through the first term, through the first year. So thinking about the funding, the social and the academic support, I think of it as the golden triangle. So that's, and we heard the student talk about space and digital teaching and learning. Hopefully as the pandemic ends, all teaching and learning being digital won't be necessary, but digital is a real opportunity as well, and it's getting the right combinations of in-person, face-to-face and digital that will really make the difference. And there's some great work going on around the country in universities. Just before I left the Office for Students, I published a report on digital teaching and learning and the future, and there are many great examples of how digital can help empower and unlock potential in combination with in-person teaching. And you can see how that would work with an Oxford College and with tutorial systems really, really well. Then finally, I'm going to stop on this. The last thing is, once you've gone out and found the students, attracted them, enabled them, empowered them, and they've succeeded and they leave and go to Linklaters or wherever they're going to go in their careers, build a relationship with them forever, a lifelong relationship. And those students can then be, the former students who are now making their way in life can then be supporters of further access, further success in university for the students who come after them. And for too long, and I know you're changing this very actively at Wadham, but for too long, Oxford colleges basically only contacted alumni to see if they could raise some money, and there's no harm in that. But actually, there's lots and lots of alumni of Wadham and other Oxford colleges who'd love to, at the right moment, to have a conversation with a student who's thinking, should I do a law degree? Can I talk to a partner at Linklaters? Or should I go into the civil service? Can I talk to a senior civil servant who was formerly at Wadham, is now those kinds of things, or going into business or whatever it might be. So I just think making the most of the alumni, and that kind of completes the circle. So if you can be ambitious, go and find the right students and get them in, support them through their degree in the ways I've described, and then build a lifelong relationship with them, I think you will make a significant contribution to changing the world, because Wadham with its leadership can be a catalyst for other parts of Oxford and indeed for the university sector as a whole.
Michael, thank you so much. We'll come back to a few of your points, I'm sure. And before I introduce Sally, a quick question for you in the chat box, which is about the expansion of the sector, and particularly, I think, of Oxford and the effect that might have on access. Is that part of this discussion that's missing, do you think?
I think the expansion of the sector is a huge opportunity to do this, and these things are much harder in constrained times when places are under pressure, because obviously the competition for each space intensifies. So I do think the expansion of the sector is good, not mindless expansion, not calling things that aren't really degrees, not that kind of expansion, but the opportunity for students who've got the potential in the way that you're thinking about potential, as well as just A-level grades, and getting them into university and universities such as Oxford, I think is a huge opportunity. So I'm in favour of the expansion of that. I'm also in favour of alternative routes to degrees, like degree apprenticeships, where you take 6 years, you get paid, you're working for Deloitte, for example, and at the end of it, you get a degree from a leading university, as well as having had paid work right the way through. So there's different ways of expanding that are all worthwhile. And while I've got the floor, I'm also really glad that the current government is introducing a further education bill, which will sharpen up the whole skills agenda in a way that we, the British, have failed at since at least 1884. So these things need to go together, not to be seen in competition with each other.
Michael, thanks again, and thanks to Nick Hillman for the question in the chat box as well. So Sally, it really is over to you now. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sally McGrath, Science Coordinator, Head of Psychology and Raising Aspirations Coordinator at Biddenham School in Bedford, where I understand, Sally, you were also a pupil back in the day. Share your perspective, please. What's it been like for you and your colleagues and pupils during this time, and what have you learned?
So obviously it's been a really challenging 2 years in many ways. I say 2 years because obviously 2 academic years have been covered. It's been scary, like this time last year when we were being told, you know, we're going to be back in September in full classrooms of kids. You know, how could that possibly be safe? It's been unpredictable. You have members of SLT coming in and out of your room saying, okay, I need to take this kid to self-isolate now. You know, half an hour later, I need to take this kid as well. You know, who's going to be next? And that is still going on to some extent. You know, there's kids who are on their, you know, 6th or 7th time of isolating, or they're stuck out in Pakistan because they can't come home because of the quarantining. It's been inconvenient because we've had one-way systems. We've had to have the doors and windows open in the depth of winter. We've had to, you know, have staggered lesson timings, cleaning the desks, you know, sanitizing hands, taking up 5-10 minutes of each lesson, masks, you know, battling with kids about so many other things rather than, you know, trying to get them to make use of this valuable time in school. And then, of course, moving online, which by the second time we got very good at, certainly at my school. We've been in the lucky position that we have, each child has a Chromebook that they have at home. So we could basically move straight away to a live timetable, which was exactly mirroring that they would have at school. Lots of learnings there on how to adapt lessons, how to kind of keep your eyes from going too blurry when you're teaching online all day, then marking online, then planning online. Lots of issues with attendance, some access, you know, difficulties with Wi-Fi, but, you know, some other schools I know have had lots of issues with laptops and devices in general, you know, being promised however many and getting 2 between a school, for example. Just the difference of being online, you know, you can't go around and help a student one-to-one, you can't quickly write something on the whiteboard, and, you know, really varying levels of engagement even with the kids who are there. So again, I was quite lucky with some of the classes I had were quite engaged, but I heard horror stories of absolutely no cameras on, no microphones on, maybe you get a little something in the chat now and again, which has left all the kids in very, very different places when coming back. So that's just something, if I forget to come back to later, that universities obviously need to understand that they're all starting in very different places and they need to catch up to different extents. Learnings generally, you know, some positives of virtual meetings, but I've started a virtual medical society throughout last summer, which has been running every Friday since last summer over the summer holidays. Quick Google Meet catch-ups with a kid or with another teacher can be really handy. So kind of the technological side, but more specifically kind of learning how each cohort has been affected so differently. So last year's year 13s, they had no revision time, they had no last day of school, they had no chance to improve their grades, and they were just given these grades that to them sort of came out of nowhere, which were then a few days later something better, but possibly by then missed opportunities at uni. Some may have started uni now, and that may have looked obviously very different this year with the level of support. Year 13s that have just left, they missed in-person contact time in the first lockdown, March to July, and then January to March this year. They had an assessment system which was very, very hard for the teachers this year, because alongside teaching our full timetable, we had to do the job of the exam boards, and the kids had to revise, you know, some amount of content, which was luckily we were able to bin some of it, but they had, you know, not very much time, and obviously worries about how much each is going to impact their grade. Will the school grading be fair between schools and sectors? You know, the independent sector and the public sector, will they make their university grades? It was mentioned, I think, about the fewer offers potentially being made this year. Will that continue next year? Are there going to be deferrals that mean certain kids this year are going to miss out because of last year's deferrals? We're thinking maybe we'll have a lot of students in the current year 12s that might need to resit year 13, for example. They've been less affected content-wise because they were just kind of finishing their GCSEs and were given these GCSE grades somehow as well. But they've never revised and done exams. They missed obviously this January to March. We've got some that I mentioned have been stuck out of the country for extended periods. Some of them will have to restart year 12 even. Current year 11s hit by both lockdowns, this new assessment system, how will their grades compare to what they would have got? How will it affect their progression to the next stage? And then current year 10s and below have all been hit by both lockdowns. And, you know, wondering how long the centre assessed grades system will go on for. Will we have to do the same process next year, or will the exams happen in some form but look different? Will they slim down the content? Again, pupils will be in very different places from each other, even within schools. We've heard about some catch-up provision from the government, but the figure I've heard is £50 per pupil, which I've heard is about 10 times less than is recommended. What can we do with this £50? Do we want to make everything about falling behind and catching up academically? Do we want to drill into them all this maths and science so that they succeed in their GCSEs or whatever form they take? Or do we want to focus on, you know, what are their ambitions moving forward? Focus on those. They've also missed out on so much outside of the academic sphere, so social contact, development, trips, work experience. So yeah, we don't want to make it all about this sort of academic catch up. We want to make it, you know, giving them a bit of life again and yeah, getting their mental health back on track, hopefully. So yeah,
it sounds like some huge challenges that you've responded to valiantly, but also some opportunities, some things that have come up that might not otherwise have surfaced without these circumstances. And it's fascinating to hear about the different effects it's had on pupils based on subject and year groups as well. Sort of notion of the lost generation. There are many layers underneath that, of course. It's good to see the debate between Jacqueline and David unfolding in the chat box. But Sally, just very briefly, I might just put to you the question from Susie. And I'll just condense it slightly, if I may, Susie, which is about engaging parents and carers. So through access work, I know you're linked to Wadham at Bynham. How important is it that universities and indeed employers may be engaged with parents at this time?
I think parental input is really, really valuable. I run a load of Google Classrooms on various different careers, so medicine, engineering, mainly STEM, but healthcare careers, but more general Oxbridge kind of Russell Group subject exploration. And I'm constantly bunging on opportunity after opportunity, virtual summer schools, or, you know, back in the day, normal summer schools. And yeah, like the kids maybe get an email and they get so many, they kind of ignore it. But then one time I thought I'd send a text home to all the parents of all the kids who were in those classrooms saying, could you take a moment this evening to sit down with your son, daughter, and go through the list of opportunities that are on the medical classroom. And I had a couple of, you know, contacts back from parents like, oh, tell me about this opportunity. So yeah, the kids have got, you know, a lot on their plate, and they don't always appreciate the importance of looking forward to their next step and thinking, where are they going, thinking, what do I want to do career wise, and the fact that they have to do something about it. You know, we don't do work experience anymore. When I was at that school, we did 2 weeks of work experience in year 10, but it hasn't happened lately. So they just might not necessarily get anything like that.
Sally, thank you so much. I'm keeping an eye on colleagues' questions. Diane, I've spotted your hand up, but bear with me a second because I really want to bring Sandra into the conversation as well. Sandra, delighted as always to introduce you, Managing Director at global law firm DLA Piper, but also notably here, Chair of the Social Mobility Commission, the advisory body sponsored by the Cabinet Office. Sandra, before we hand over to questions more generally from the audience, share with us how the effects of the pandemic have focused employers' minds on how they engage with universities and colleges like Wadham.
Thank you very much. And can I echo Sir Michael Barber's comments about Wadham and the work that it's doing? It's fantastic and it's excellent to see. And just to comment maybe a little bit on the chat before I go on to that point, you know, my parents had no idea what Oxford and Cambridge are. My parents still don't really know what I do. They know I'm a lawyer now, but one was a painter and decorator. My mother was a cleaner. They have no idea of this world. And so I can, you know, rest assured there are lots of people out there that don't know about this world, that don't even venture into city centres because they can't afford it. And so these programmes that are being done by Wadham and the outreach that you're doing is absolutely vital. And I would also, and I never big up other law firms because obviously we're all in competition, but Linklaters and the Access programme, I would completely endorse that access that legal profession are trying to do, because as a profession, we haven't been the most inclusive. So from my perspective, I think employers in the pandemic switch very quickly to digital. In the service type industries that I'm in, they switch very quickly to digital. And Daniel was talking about space and the importance of space in the video we were just watching, and we were able to switch very quickly to Zoom. But what we also very quickly realized that if you didn't have the space, if you didn't have the ability to move into your loft room or to have a quiet space, that was something that suddenly woke a lot of people up to the socioeconomic disparities that were existing within their workforces and in the communities that they started to help. So suddenly it was a real rude awakening to, yes, outreach efforts had always been there by employers, and they also always had a diversity and inclusion agenda, but it was very starkly on their doorstep. And it was also an opportunity for employers to think, okay, we're working differently. We are seeing that we can do a lot more remotely if the access, if the digital is there. We have an obligation to, as employers, to look at that and to support our communities that don't have that digital access. And that D&I approach was very prevalent and something that needed to be dealt with. But it was also clear that actually, if we can work in this way as employers, do we need to really look at what we often talk about, the skills gap and the lack of talent and the war for talent? When we say there's all these people out there that we're all competing for the same people, actually there were whole swathes of people that employers weren't even thinking about in communities that they'd never sought to recruit people from, suddenly perhaps were going to be available to them because they could work in a different way. They wouldn't expect those people to move to London and to move to the big cities where the employers worked. And I think that what is shown in terms of universities and employers was that if the universities are in those places, if the universities are doing the outreach, that employers should be very much linking up, and they should be working collaboratively to see how that outreach could not only be the university saying, this is what our world is like, this is what you can do, you can come to Oxford, you can succeed, it's not the experience that you think it might be, but the employers could be there also saying, and you can come to us as an employers, we will support, we will give you the experience of being in a law firm like ours, being in an accountancy firm like ours, and together we can take that journey from school to university to the workplace. And I think very much it's a wake-up call for just, you know, expanding the outreach that a lot of employers were doing into areas they'd never really looked at before, but also linking up very much closely with universities and saying, okay, what skills do people need? I mean, the environmental, the ability to communicate in this forum is a skill. You know, it's all very well having the ability digital. If you have the access, if you have the ability to the laptop, then you've still got to be able to bring yourself out and confidence and your ability to talk in this environment. So those skills are things that we can work with universities as employers to ensure that we are addressing, as well as the skills that you need to do the actual job. So it's a really turning point, I think, for employers and their relationship with universities in their part to play in that outreach, and also how we can better equip people to deal with going to places like Oxford and then moving to firms like ours. So a real, you know, out of a very negative situation, I think lots of opportunities to have outreach like we've never had it before, and to really interact to determine what universities need to be providing for those employers who want to go into those areas they've never been working at before. I'm going to stop it there because there's so much interesting chat going on that I want to make sure that people get that opportunity to bring that up.
Sandra, thank you so much for those reflections. I'll just pause to see if there are any hands raised from audience members this evening. I might turn just to Ronald, over to you. Please feel free to unmute.
Well, I just want to give you, I feel like Alistair Cook, voice from America, but I just want to give you the voice from America as the headmaster of a school in America for 52 years. I think what Wadham is doing is laudable, but it seems to be a top-down solution more than a bottom-up. In New York, we have two institutions, one called Prep for Prep, whose goal is to find children in underprivileged minority communities, teach them, and then help them apply to independent day schools, and then continue counseling them, continue supporting them to continue with college guidance, and continue them through helping them when they go to the elite universities that they go to. The other program is ABC, which does exactly the same, only for boarding schools. And these are therefore bottom-up institutions. These are charities that look for potential students who may be 8, 9, 10, 11, who have the potential to go to elite universities and, but for intervention, might not have that opportunity. The other thing I want to say is I totally agree with all the comments about the emotional problems of COVID, but you're forgetting one major group. We had to, and I think, I don't take this as just us, I mean, we had to provide counselors for students. So we have one wellness counselor for every 100 students. We also then had to find a wellness counselor for the faculty. So the faculty are the people who seem to be forgotten. They have been triumphs of heroism, but it has taken its toll on them. And if they're going to model how they're going to handle COVID, they've needed, at least our faculty have needed, we have about 100, our faculty have needed their own wellness counselor to give them the psychological support to handle a very difficult situation in which they're used to direct contact with their students. And now it has to some extent been abridged because of COVID. Having said that, I hand it back to you.
Ronald, thank you. Nods across the Zoom screen as you mentioned the welfare of faculty and teachers, and not only from faculty at Wadham, I don't think. But to your first point about the learning from the US, Michael, I wonder if you might just reflect a bit on your experiences of the contrast.
Yes, I mean, the US has got, I've spent a lot of time with universities there, and I'm very, very impressed by the kind of bottom-up initiatives that Ronald mentions, and they are very, very inspiring. I think it's not quite fair to characterize what Wadham's doing as purely top-down, though. Wadham is, from the place it is in Oxford, looking out at the education system and encouraging young people to come to it, and you could describe that as top-down, but it's also building relationships with schools, as we've just heard from Sally. It's also invited to join these conversations a whole range of bottom-up initiatives that are part of the general access agenda. Maybe we just haven't set that out vividly enough in this conversation, but I think Wadham rightly is doing a combination of top-down and bottom-up, and I think that's what's going to work.
Thank you very much, Michael, and Ronald, for your comments as well. I wonder if we might just reflect briefly on learnings in the exam system. I'm riffing off some of Peter's opening comments, of course, here about A-levels and the potential to reform the A-level system and our dependency on that as a metric for talent and potential. Sally, Sandra, any thoughts on this topic? Thank you.
What I was going to say, it kind of relates to something that Peter was saying, that it's kind of more important in some ways to flag some of the context that these kids have had over the last couple of years in particular, ask us how they've been affected, and to ensure fairness of getting in, then perhaps more weighting on the interview, which will demonstrate their potential rather than exam results and entrance tests. I've had a student, for example, who's got in last year, possibly the only year he would have ever got in, because he got a B in chemistry. He may have got an A if he'd got the chance to do his real exams, but he's absolutely sort of thriving. He's not even there yet, and he's been doing lab projects and whatever, emailing me his microscopy pictures like he always used to do at school. And so I think, yeah, definitely the 3 A-level kind of A's, A stars, for a lot of our kids, that's just where they fall off the possibility of aiming for a university like this. And yeah, it's a huge amount of mental health impact on them to try and get those grades, get those predicted grades and get those real grades. And, you know, with what disruption they've had over the last couple of years, they need they need a lot of support with their mental health as well. And, you know, just trying to make them smash A-levels is just not going to help.
Thanks, Sally. And Sandra, some symmetry here maybe with also the recruitment practices of some employers and the sort of narrow definitions of talent. Not to ask you a loaded question, but is there symmetry here? Do the recruitment practices of employers also have something to learn during this time?
Absolutely. I mean, we as a if I talk with my commissioner hat on now, we have introduced a toolkit that for employers to look at, not only collecting data on socioeconomic background, to really try and look at the scale of any issue that may have and what they might want to do to address it. And recruitment is very much part of that toolkit that the Commission talks about, and the HR departments and the expectations of people that recruit in the image of the people that have gone before, or the belief that that is what a good lawyer might look like, it's been something that we've very much challenged, and contextualized recruitment is very much part of many employers and programs who are interested in really making advancement in this space, and that is something that I would recommend. And in that context, then the A-levels fall off the window. In fact, the degree to an extent may not even be relevant, because at the first stage we were saying what is your capability and your ability to do this job and to thrive in this environment, and that is definitely something that we should see. And I also think the solicitor apprenticeships, we've just recently introduced those. It's a long time, but you're earning and you're getting access to university and higher education institutions at the same time. And I think that also says, does A levels is certainly not the only thing that we should judge talent and potential by.
Sandra, thank you. Peter, a comment from you, and then a final question to our panel, if I may.
Thank you. Just following up on a point that Sally made very briefly. For many years now, at confirmation stage, so in August, the point when A-level results come out, Wadham has admitted, has let in small numbers of students, only those from underrepresented or relatively deprived backgrounds, who have missed their A-level offer, so people who've received AAB or ABB. And we've been doing this for long enough that we have got quite robust data on how these students then perform in their preliminary examinations and their final examinations. They don't outperform the rest of our cohort, but then you wouldn't expect them to. They do perform absolutely slap bang on the average of the Wadham undergraduate cohort. There is no sign that such students struggle when at university. And I think last summer, our current first year undergraduate cohort is going to be a crucial one from this perspective, because as many of you will know, this last summer, Oxford took the decision to admit all its offer holders, whatever the grades they in fact received or were assigned at A level. So the data that we get from that year to see how those students perform, I think will be really critical in future in seeing the extent to which Oxford can, and other universities, can meaningfully move to a contextualized system of A-level offers, of different kinds of offers for students from different educational backgrounds.
Peter, thank you. And a final question then, if I may, to the panel before we hand back to Ken and to Julie. And I might invite each of our panel members to respond, and I might press you to be brief if that's okay. But Michael, maybe in the first instance, a response from you. It's an entirely hypothetical question, of course, but if you could imagine a fictional college with significant funds and an appetite for being progressive in this space, what would your advice be about where to put that funding? On outreach, admissions, student well-being, engaging with employers? We've heard across all of these topics so far this evening. Your advice, and Michael, to you first, if I may.
Just before I answer that excellent question, I just want to completely reinforce everything Peter has just said about the opportunity that this year's Oxford entrance will provide for understanding this question. And there's lots of reasons to think, while A-level is quite a good measure of whether you've learned the syllabus, it's not necessarily a good measure of whether you're going to succeed at Oxford or any other, or a law firm or any other future place. I listed a handful of things at the beginning. I would put it in the phase you're at in Wadham. I would put it in the enabling and empowering the students when they get to university, looking at what a combination of in-person and digital support for them would look like, building on the fantastic building that you've already put in place for outreach purposes and for undergraduate student purposes. So I think I'd invest it there, but it's just a quick answer off the top of my head.
Thank you. Sandra, and then Sally, thanks.
I would probably say outreach. I think there's so much to be done in getting the message out there, in getting people to understand what does it look like to be at an institution, how high can I reach, what is expected of me, what isn't expected of me, because it's those preconceptions those preconceived ideas that are really holding a lot of people back. So outreach every time for me.
Well, your answer and mine go really well together, Sandra.
They do.
And Sally, just take yourself off mute and then we'll, thank you.
Thank you. So I'd say, going back to the theme, that the different year groups need different things. So current year 12s need study skills and independence. They've never done exams, they've never revised. Year 11 and 13, who've just been through this assessment system, need resilience. They need, mental health support. Specifically in the sciences, they're going to need practical skill support. I think other subjects that are more practical as well, dance, drama, music, sport, textiles, DT, they're anything with a practical or performance element that's going to have been missing. And, you know, even if that's not the academic focus, some kind of big musical number that they could all get involved with once they get to college or something would just be lovely to kind of increase their confidence, get their social skills back up. And finally, contact with students and professionals, real life contact to see, hear, and, you know, touch their future studies and careers, not online.
Sally, thank you. I think that provides us with a wonderful summary, those 3 comments, and a wonderful final paragraph to our debate. And it sounds like the headline here is "Never Waste a Good Crisis." Michael, as you started, now is a good time to be visionary, to be ambitious. Let me thank our panel, Michael, Sally, Sandra. It's fantastic to hear from you this evening. And thanks to colleagues for the interactions in the chat and the questions as well. And just to close by adding my own congratulations to the college for the work that it's doing, and best wishes for the future. And with that, Ken, back to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you very much for sharing that and drawing out so many interesting themes. And thank you, Michael, Sandra, and Sally. It's been very, very useful and helpful for us to listen to your insights, and we're very, very grateful to you. I think I just close before I hand over to Julie by mentioning 2 things. First, we haven't had an opportunity to talk about our Bedford programme, which is a programme in which the college is involved in sustained intervention with very young secondary school students over a period of years. And this is part of our bottom-up rather than top-down approach, because as Michael said, we do both. But this is a sustained programme of intervention and involvement with very young secondary school students, which is a part of our work which we're very interested in and very interested to see develop, again supported by the generosity of so many of our donors. Secondly, I wanted to pick up something that Dan, our student, said in the little video. Many of our students don't have the sort of environments at home which enable them to study in the way that other students can, and this is a very significant source of disadvantage, and the pandemic has really highlighted this. It's there all the time because our students work during vacations and they're expected to. And those who go home to shared bedrooms and no study space and childcare arrangements and caring arrangements are obviously highly disadvantaged. And this was really emphasized during the pandemic. And what we did was, as soon as we could, we brought back as many of our students as possible, and all those who self-identified as not having appropriate study space at home. So whereas most colleges during the lockdown had 30 or 40 or 50 students in residence, we had about 250. And we had obviously rules in place to keep them all safe in terms of mixing and household groups and so on. But we were very confident that to pile disadvantage on already disadvantaged students by having them at home for extended periods when they had no proper workspace was just unthinkable for the college. And I think we need to recognize how important the college space is for our students. For many of them, it's the best space they have. And that's why we're so grateful to have been able to put up these new buildings to provide them with study spaces as well as other facilities. And thank you to everyone who has supported us in that. So it has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you all. Thank you for those who contributed to the chat. I'm sorry we haven't been able to arrive at every question and answer every question. I want to thank Hugh again, Hugh Munro again, Dr. Munro, for the wonderful work that he has been doing at Wadham over the last few years. And Michael, Sally and Sandra, thank you again. Nick, thank you. And with that, I'll hand over to our wonderful development director, Julie Haig. And Julie, thank you to your team for all the work they put into organising this event. Again, we're very grateful to them.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you very much to our wonderful speakers for helping Wadham continue to be as visionary as we can also on the next part of this journey of change. One of the great privileges of being part of the Wadham community is that we are part of this global group of people who deeply care about the college and its future. Thank you very much for bringing new building blocks to that journey, to Sandra, Michael, Sally this evening, and to all of you tonight, but also to all of you around the world who are joining us from far-flung places. We're delighted always that we have been able to meet in this virtual space. It's been a lifesaver during the pandemic, but I have to say we're also very happy to say that the college is now open for alumni to visit. So if you are able to come to this island, if you're able to come to Oxford and to Wadham, we can actually welcome you physically. And I couldn't agree more with Michael when you say that the Access Centre is this visual and physical representation of our commitment to change and to social mobility. But we'd love to show you that in person. We'd love to welcome you here. So drop us a line in the development office, and we'd love to take you around in socially distanced ways. But do take care, everyone, and thank you, all of you here tonight, for contributing to such a rich discussion. Come and visit us when you can. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. Good night, everyone.